Hey guys, welcome back to Mo's Game Table. Today we're going to take a look inside NATO 1961, The Berlin Crisis. This is a game designed by Kerry Anderson and is published by Microgame Design Group. I've shown off several of Kerry's games on the channel before and you guys are pretty familiar with them now. Kerry's a really good designer and makes a lot of really fun games, especially the sci-fi games that I've shown off on the channel, but also he does a lot of conventional games as well. This is one of them, NATO 1961. The other interesting thing is the Cuban Missile Crisis, which is a game I showed off recently on the channel. That game and this one can be tied together to create a bigger game, which is really neat. And I think that's a really awesome thing that Kerry does with his games. He finds ways to tie them together. So that way, if you have this game and that game, and they cover different aspects of a conflict, you can bring them together to give an overall richer experience, which I think is fantastic. And just another value add to the titles from Microgame Design Group. This is a Ziploc game, so there's no back of the box, but I'll give you a quick rundown on the background for this game. NATO 1961 is a simulation of the potential for war in Germany, covering events that could have led to World War III. Players assume the roles of President John F. Kennedy and the NATO powers, or Soviet Premier Nikita Khrushchev and the Warsaw Pact general staffs. Confronted with the crisis, players can manage the conflict at a limited level or escalate it to full-out war between the superpowers. The 17 by 22-inch map covers the central front, including both East and West Germany, as well as part of Czechoslovakia, France, and the lowlands. The 240 half-inch counters show regimental, brigade, and division-level forces of both NATO and the Warsaw Pact. So let's dive right in and take a look at the components you get with this game. So we start off with the cover sheet, and as usually the case with the Microgame Design Group games, you get the cover sheet, but on the back it has a player aid, and here it is, the World Opinion track and the Stability track. Then we have our rules. Player aids, there are 3 of them. The counter sheet, and our 2 maps. So let's set up the maps and take a closer look at the game. And here's a look at the 2 maps that come with the game. I just butted them up together. You've got that little white line on either side of the paper. You can just cut that off so that we can marry them up a lot cleaner than I have right here, which is what I generally do with these maps. Slap some plexi down, you're good to go. You've got a lot of different terrain features to keep in mind in the game. These little black circles with the missiles inside, those are Nike missile sites. All these little hatched areas right here, those are urban areas. And then of course you have dense urban areas, which are like, they look like clouds kind of. That just shows you the density of the urban areas. You also have air bases, ports, districts, and then you have the national border, the Iron Curtain, which goes along here, which is the dark gray line there. The districts are noted with these dashed red lines, and then the national borders are the solid red lines that go across the map. But overall, beautiful maps and not a large footprint, so it will fit on everybody's table. Next, we'll take a look at the player aids that come with the game. As we saw at the beginning, the cover sheet on the back of it has the World Opinion track and the Stability track. You'll have a listing of events and thresholds at the bottom. Next, we have the Game Turn Record track at the top, and at the bottom we have the Riot Suppression and Intensive Supply tables. And on the back we have the initial setup for both Warsaw Pact and NATO forces. On the next sheet we have the Combat Results table, the Terrain Effects chart, Deep Penetration Attack table, and the Supply State Summary chart. On the back of that we have the Nuclear Arsenal chart, the Unit Legend, which explains to you all the stats on each of the counters, the Counterforce chart, Bomber Penetration table, and the Massive Dice Roll table. And on the last sheet we have the World Opinion table. This ties into the back of the cover sheet, the World Opinion track that we looked at. This is how things are going to escalate before you actually get to conventional warfare. There's a kind of a diplomatic and political maneuvering aspect to the game, and this is what's going to drive that here, the World Opinion table. And lastly, we have the escalation ladder, which ties into all that political maneuvering that goes on ahead of time before things go kinetic. Really interested to see how that aspect of the game works. And we'll take a look at the counter sheet that comes with the game. We've got US units, Belgian units, Netherlands, Canadian, UK, French, and West German forces on the left, along with some administrative counters, and then the Soviet, Polish, East German, and the Czech forces at the bottom. Now we'll take a look at the rules. This is a 19-page black and white rule book. On the inside of the front cover, we have the table of contents, which lists out all the rules and their associated page numbers. At the end, we have the scenarios. designer's notes, game credits, the selected references, and then the linked game, which is what I was talking about earlier, where you can tie this into the Cuban Missile Crisis game, which I've also covered on the channel recently. Start off over here on the right with the introduction, a listing of the game components, the rulebook, map board, counters, so on and so forth, player aids. Then we get to game scale, preparation for play, and then the sequence of play starts on page 4. And it breaks down all the steps of the sequence of play for you. National stability, escalation. Remember what I was talking about before. This is not a game where you're just going to get right into kinetic combat. You're going to have a lot of political posturing, maneuvering, things like that to escalate things up. That's why the world opinion and stability and all those things are all going to come into play. And I think that's pretty neat to have that aspect in a game like this without having to be a giant monster game. You're getting kind of a mini monster almost experience in a very tight area, which I think is pretty cool. You have acts of aggression, world opinion, escalation ladder, which we just talked about. All that's explained to you here. Then we get to the Iron Curtain, Berlin, East German refugees, West Berlin blockade, the airlift. All those things are in place. Air power, supply lines, supply line attacks, reinforcements, and how those are all handled for the NATO forces. Movement, stacking, zones of control, supply. Then we get to combat on page 11. All these steps for combat. And then we get to nuclear combat because, I mean, it can't be a World War III game without the nuclear combat aspect of the game tied into it. And the nuclear combat rules continue on for a couple more pages. Then we get to ending the game on page 15. The scenarios start on page 16. There are 3 scenarios that come with the game: limited war, general war, and taking Lyon on the 9th day. These are going to be just direct conflicts. You're just going to go right into combat. There's going to be none of that political maneuvering and stuff like that we saw with the full game. If you want that, you play the full game. But if you just want to get right in and start shooting things, those are the 3 scenarios you're going to want to jump into. Designer's notes on page 17. The references and then the linked game is explained to you on page 19. And remember, I said that the Cuban Missile Crisis can be linked into this game. And it explains to you here how to use the political event cards from Cuban Missile Crisis, how the events from that game are going to affect this game. Then you have the nuclear arsenal chart 1962, because Cuban Missile Crisis 1962, this game is set in 61, so you're going to use this for the arsenal chart if you play the full game. And then we're at the back of the rulebook. And that is a look at everything you get inside of NATO 1961, the Berlin Crisis. This is a game designed by Carrie Anderson and is published by Microgame Design Group. Well, if it has anything to do with Cold War, especially Cold War gone hot, I'm going to have my eyes on it. I've thought about this game in the past, and Kerry beat me to the punch by sending me a copy of this, and I'm really happy I've got it because I've already got Cuban Missile Crisis, and now with NATO 1961, I can join the two together to give myself a bigger experience for that time period of 61, 62. I can play this individually, or I can link them both up together. And I think that was a really fascinating and very scary time for people around the world because you had the 2 biggest nuclear superpowers rattling sabers and came to the brink a couple times. Thankfully, everybody was smart enough to pull back before it got bad. But this is a great way to see maybe how things would have gone by gaming it out. And it's a fascinating subject, and this is just a really tight little area, the Berlin Crisis. This is not going to be a full-on World War III all across Europe. This is going to be just a really tight area that you're going to be concentrated on, and I think that's going to be neat. And I love the fact that you can do all of the escalation aspect of it as well. You can see how much you can push things before it goes hot. So I'm really looking forward to checking this one out. Carrie's games are a lot of fun. If you've not checked out Microgame Design Group, I strongly recommend checking them out. There's so many great games that Carrie's done, and they're very reasonably priced, and they're just really good fun. And the quality is outstanding. You're definitely not going to go wrong getting any of their titles. Well, I hope that helps you guys out if you'd be curious about this one. You have any comments or questions, post them down below. Thanks for tuning in, guys. See you next time.